Hello, everyone. Welcome to 7E's Inside ESG, where we meet with leaders in sustainability, climate, and the ESG space. This series aims to provide a clear view into the ever-changing landscape of sustainability practices. I'm Doron, Marketing Director for 7E, an AI-driven compliance solution focusing on streamlining data collection and reporting for ESG, EHS, risk, and governance. Today, our guest is Chris Plath. Hi, Chris. Welcome to Inside ESG.
Hi, Doron. Thanks for having me, and thanks to 7E as well.
Thanks. Great to have you with us. Chris is a senior ESG consultant at Leaders Arena, an independent advisory firm providing strategic support to listed companies on their environmental, social, and governance-related initiatives. Chris is an industry expert on how investors assess companies on financial material ESG issues and is the thought leader on corporate governance, engagement, and proxy voting. He also has extensive knowledge of the ESG ratings agencies' methodologies. In his previous role as Vice President and Corporate Governance Specialist at Moody's Investors Services, Chris was responsible for leading MIS corporate governance analysis and corporate engagement. He won a number of Moody's Research Award for authoring original research on topics including shareholder activism, executive compensation, and risk oversight, and was quoted frequently in the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and Bloomberg. Chris's previous experience include designing corporate governance education programs for senior executives and corporate directors and leading non-US proxy voting research at IRRC, now part of ISS. Chris is based in the US, enjoys helping companies understand investor priorities and improve their ESG communication. Chris, thanks again for joining us today. Before we start, would you mind sharing a bit about your history, and if you can share about where your sustainability journey started?
Yeah, certainly. So as of January next year, it'll be 30 years actually in this space,
Wow.
which is kind of scary. I'm definitely dating myself there, but during this time, I've had the pleasure of seeing these issues kind of mature across the board. Working originally for a couple not-for-profits, then working for a large public company, and now working for a smaller private firm, and across all different kinds of stakeholders, from equity investors to having lots of conversations with members of boards of directors and senior managements, working in the fixed income space, and now working with companies, as part of our consulting work. But my journey actually started, again, a long time ago. Coming out of graduate school in Washington, D.C., and answering an ad in the Washington Post,
Wow.
literally opening the newspaper back then and getting the red pen out and circling an ad for an intern for the Investor Responsibility Research Center who needed interns to help them out during proxy season. Because for those familiar with proxy season, all the work there's a huge ramp up in shareholder meetings, and all these need to be analyzed and covered and written down and sent out to investors. But the IRC itself, unfortunately, it's no longer around, but that had a very interesting history, and that was formed way back in the early 70s, and is really one of the first nonprofits out there providing public research on social issues related matters, and that was mostly related to companies that were doing business in South Africa. And really, the universities at the time looking to divest holdings from companies that were doing business there, and later shareholder pressure around that for some of the companies like, General Motors and other large U.S. companies that were doing that. And then later that morphed into environmental, work that they were doing around various topics like, just the early days were just around pollution and that kind of thing. Um, but I came in on the corporate governance side, but also had the opportunity just while I was there to see that the work that they were doing on the social and environmental front and all the issues that they were handling, and some are still around to this day. They published a book while I was there. Called the Sweatshop Quandary, and that had to deal with issues that are still relevant to this day: modern
Yeah.
slavery, human rights, supply chains, all that. They were tackling that back then. And then after that, I moved to the Conference Board, which is a business and economics research think tank. And that was right after Enron and WorldCom, and the focus then was really creating sets of best practices as companies sort of rebounded from the corporate scandals of Enron and WorldCom and all that, and getting together groups of executives of how do you think about that. And then once that sort of moved into the background a little bit, more discussions started emerging around. It wasn't ESG at the time because that term wasn't
Yeah.
coined just yet, but there was issues around non-financial matters and long-termism. They were calling it long-termism back then. And that was basically like, how can we sort of get out of this short-term mindset that companies are in, just overly focused on quarterly earnings? How do we kind of extend that and focus on the long term?
Yeah.
And that discussion was, involved some social environmental components and also a lot on the executive compensation front. Like, how do we take these short-term compensation structures and extend them to focus businesses more on the long term?
Yeah.
So got a taste of it there, and then at Moody's, really nothing. You just kind of heard about it, and then the financial crisis hits, and then obviously nobody's thinking about it during the financial crisis because of way bigger fish to
Right.
fry at that time. But
Yes.
as we emerge from that, and especially after the Paris Climate Summit in 2015, really in 2016, it really hit hard. And we had all these stakeholders, including regulators and fixed income investors and others, NGOs asking Moody's, "Well, what are you guys doing on ESG? What are you guys doing on climate?" And then that was sort of a four-alarm fire for the company at that point, is because there was really nothing that was being done, and that launched the initial research and heat mapping on physical climate risk and transition risk, and started thinking about, okay, how can the rating agency embed this work more into its actual credit analysis, which is what fixed income investors really want. They want to know that you're looking at it, that it's being incorporated, that you're taking into account all these risks, even though there's not very good ways of doing that just yet. And that's matured over the years. And then since Moody's, obviously, I've been with Leaders Arena, and we work with all different types of companies on just pure ESG, from strategy and road mapping to
Yeah.
benchmarking to uh, helping companies with the reports, shareholder outreach, ESG ratings, you name it. So it's been, a long and very interesting journey, and it's just a really interesting and thought-provoking space to work in, and glad to be working in it.
Thanks, Chris. It is a fascinating space to be in. And actually, it's not that long ago, Paris Agreement. When you think about it, when you think other fields, I mean, the big step done in the past, what, it's less than 10 years. I think
Hmm.
a lot has been done. I mean, again, I'm always with this conversation looking for the optimistic side. Well, while we see all the data and we see, and as you said, I think first of all, talking in the term of stakeholders, I think is also kind of pretty new. Um, and from where you started, and I think you should. When did you start seeing it as talking about stakeholders and not just shareholders, and not just the? And what does this mean? The financial was this really just over the Paris Agreement, or was there hints to it before that?
I think there was hints to it before that, coming out of the early research on long-termism and non-financial analysis and incorporating that, and that naturally involves a broader group of stakeholder considerations rather than just
Yeah.
shareholders. And it is technically embedded in fiduciary duties for U.S. directors to consider these things, but
Yeah.
what does that mean? Are you really considering or not? But
What do you mean? That's the
yeah,
big question. Yeah.
yeah, but the big stakeholder push, I think, was post Paris Climate Agreement, and it might have been before that, but I think in earnest
Okay.
when your average mainstream companies and investors really
Yeah.
started hearing about these things. And then of course Europe has taken stakeholderism, to a new level
Yeah.
as part of all their rules, and sort of
Yeah.
kind of trying to you know not mandate it, but sort of, push companies and investors to kind of, consider it more in a roundabout way.
Yeah. No, one of the reasons, by the way, I'm asking this is just out of curiosity, and from my point of view is as a marketing guy is I'm trying to understand where the triggers come from. And when I understand when we get people's attention objectively and not just, as part of a specific initiative and understand when, the politics or the geopolitics change or where there's other terms changing and where does the triggers come from that we can grab attention and looking kind of trying to understand if we can understand from history something about the future, but that's kind of just some some thoughts. Thanks, Chris. Your
Yeah.
journey is amazing, and I think and yes, I also had the newspaper in my hands at some point in my life. So we'll just
I
keep it
sort of
between
sort of
us.
miss that, the old
Uh,
classifieds. Yeah.
yes. Thanks, Chris. I'd like to start by diving into current events. The new administration took office about 5 months ago. We saw turmoil in the market, bold policy statements and some changes to the federal government. We're reading the papers and seeing others, and things go back and forth even as we speak. Reading the news this morning.
Hmm.
Um, what do you see from your point of view, and with the customers you work with, and your understanding of current events? What do you see actually changing in terms of environmental reporting requirements for domestic companies?
Well, I think the biggest change had been uh, in terms of at least on the ESG side,
Yeah,
was the under the new administration, the new SC, the decision to stop defending the its climate disclosure rules in court, essentially leaving it to sort of die on the vine. And I think obviously both investors and companies were anticipating this to come along in
yeah,
some form, at least, had been preparing for it. And now, we don't have that. So it leaves both investors and companies a little bit of a lurch because they're still looking for, um, you know, consistent and comparable data and information. On the company side, it's just the sense it's like just give us something to, report against. Just tell us what to do, basically, because we have all these voluntary reporting guidelines. We're trying to figure out, exactly
yeah.
what to do, and everybody's asking for something else. So, um, you know, th they really want the consistency and comparability. So, I think on the investor front, most investors in the ESG space we're pushing to see this, and they're not going to get that. So we're at a little bit of a void now. We can talk about the California and the state rules a little bit
Yeah,
later,
we'll
but
be getting to that. Yeah.
yeah, but in terms of actual reporting, I think our clients are moving forward. It's
Hmm.
some are taking a little bit of a wait and see approach, but the sense is that it's coming in some form, especially on the emissions front.
Yeah.
At least get that down. The climate risk disclosures, the quote unquote TCFD part, I think that's a little bit more of a work in progress across the board. But yeah, I think it's mostly business as usual on the environmental side of things.
Thanks. Following that, although you kind of touched on that, I want to focus a bit more on the investor side. How do, again, from your understanding, how do investors see these changes, and are they changing courses? Are they kind of wait and see? What's your understanding?
Yeah, well, in the ESG space, we tend to think of investors as one homogenous block, and I think that's
Right.
unfortunate. Obviously, there's tens of thousands of institutional investors, and
Yeah.
some care deeply about this. Some are, more neutral and only concerned if there's actual financial risk there. And then there's a whole other group of investors that doesn't care at all. They just
Yeah.
don't. Um, but in terms of the big institutional investors that are focused on ESG, I think it's safe to say that for the big three investors, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, who've gotten the most political blowback, there's been a chilling effect on those investors, and
Okay.
that started before the new administration with all the political attacks going on in predominantly Republican states on those investors. So you've seen them become, much less vocal in a lot of cases,
Right.
supporting fewer shareholder proposals. BlackRock sort of not even mentioning ESG anymore in its report.
Right.
And that's again because they're getting the most heat on the political front. For other large U.S. investors, we're seeing it's sort of a mixed bag, and I think that depends on their own internal strategies on ESG and their in-house and external lawyers as well, and how they're being advised. I mean, it's just, the lawyers are having a field day in all this, including on the investor side. Great time to be a lawyer, I guess. And the European investors, I think it seems to be really no change on their front in terms of their
That's
engagement
right.
approach. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just we really haven't seen much of any change. They're probably a little bit more cognizant as well, operating in the ES, sorry, in the US,
Yes.
in terms of how their lawyers are looking at these issues, but many of them see ESG and managing ESG related assets as a strategic imperative, and that's, nothing that's happening now is going to sway that. So really a mixed bag. I think we're going to see the most dent in terms of the number of shareholder proposals, across the board going forward dropping, and the
Yeah.
support for those proposals dropping. Um, but that the engagement and also the advocacy part has to go somewhere. So I
Yeah.
think maybe more of that moves a little bit more underground, less public, but it's still going to take place. I think behind the scenes, I don't really see any major slowdown in that effort.
Yeah, great. Thanks for laying that out for us. Following that, what we kind of cover, we're kind of going down, we're kind of going deeper. So we talk about the federal level and the new administration. Um, can you share what you know about the development of current legislation on the state level? And by the way, also municipal level could be interesting in more popular places. But looking at the California bill, I know obviously we talked about this show also, but other states that are moving forward. And I think on the California bill, there's also supposed to be very soon. We're supposed to hear about the terms. What's your take on it? And do you see, and are businesses already preparing for it?
Yeah. Well, I think the main one right now is the California climate
Yeah.
laws and awaiting implementation by the main regulator there, which is the California Air Resources Board or board
Mhm.
or a CARB rather. And actually, as we speak, they're holding a public workshop right
Mhm.
now to get feedback from all the various constituents on implementation of the rules. And there's a lot involved in that. A couple of the major points there are definition of what constitutes doing business in California, because
Mhm.
that's sort of more open to interpretation right now, and how that gets defined, and also what satisfies the climate risk disclosure part of that regulation.
Right.
So there's two parts. There's one that's just emissions reporting for companies
Mhm.
doing business there with revenues over $1 billion, and the other part is the TCFD, climate
Yeah.
climate risk reporting, for companies doing business there with revenues over 500 million. So the understanding, or I think the desire, is to have that look like TCFD or now ISSB 2 style reports with, what's your governance, what's your risk management,
Yeah.
scenario planning and metrics. Um, but from a practical standpoint, I think there's going to be some discussion around there with are there other things that can satisfy that as well? Like if we're doing a CDP report,
Yeah.
does that count? Um, with a particular eye to alleviating some of the burden, the reporting burden on medium-sized
Mhm.
and smaller businesses. So that's definitely the main one. And, not only do regulations still need to be determined around that, but there's also the legal challenge going on around that from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the California Chamber of
Yeah.
Commerce. And my understanding there's only one hurdle remaining on that. It's already
Right.
cleared multiple hurdles. So,
Mhm.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, it looks like it's going forward. Um, Now, whether companies are prepared or not, I think it's a mixed bag. In terms of our client base, they're already sufficiently prepared or
Right.
have the emissions part largely done, but really need to start working a little bit more in depth on the climate risk disclosure, the tougher sledding part of it, to get that wrapped up. But we hear anecdotally that there are a lot of companies, and I would imagine smaller companies, that still have no idea that this is coming. And these rules are set to take effect January 2026 as currently stands. So, potentially we're going to see a rush of companies, needing to get something together to satisfy these laws.
Yeah.
And then on the other states, yeah, there's various bills out there, and I think New York, Colorado,
Maine, I think,
Maine,
maybe.
maybe, yeah,
Yeah.
largely blue states, New Jersey, Illinois. From what I've seen, they're largely looking to mirror California. If you're going to
Right.
create a new one of these things, you don't want to make it substantially different from California because
No,
you're
for sure.
just yeah yeah. So assuming that California has set the blueprint for this and that it survives, in theory, I think it makes it easier for other states to implement similar laws. Although with the current situation,
Yeah.
with so much uncertainty, with states grappling with so many other issues, including,
Yeah.
lack of federal funding now for various programs and such. Is this going to be top of mind for state legislatures?
Mhm.
Perhaps not right now until other things become more clear. The tariff situation is a big one. Federal funding, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, on the tariff, we could probably update on it every hour. There's, I think, there's news about that.
Yeah.
So
Well, just the
it's
news yesterday. It's
so
yeah, with the
it's
with the
we'll have to
the
go
trade
back to
court.
weather at some point, but for now, it's the
For
tariff is the
now, they're
top.
still on. Yeah.
Um, Got it. Thanks. That's very helpful. I know you spoke in the past about a lot about the growing impact of climate risks. We actually touched that for a moment. How is that affecting current public companies, boards, and managements? Is it impacting reporting for smaller companies too?
Yeah, well, I think like so many issues in ESG, the answer is it depends. I think you could probably answer
Yeah,
every single question in ESG with it depends.
pretty
So it
much.
really depends. I mean, it's um, you know, certainly for the largest companies that have a bigger footprint and bigger ESG risk, especially on the climate side. The reporting there is further, further along, and in some cases you see very extensive climate risk reports, TCFD
Mhm.
style reports, that you can tell they've spent just a lot of time on. For other companies, particularly for smaller companies and those that don't have a heavy footprint, those like in the
Yeah,
small
yeah,
software companies or whatever, like, okay, why are we going to spend a ton of time on this unless we're being pushed on it? And they do get pushed on it
you do.
if they're further down the supply chain and they're looking to win business, like, we've had clients say, this supplier, this buyer wants us to, um, you know, report our emissions and have this risk analysis done, and that kind of sets a little bit of a fire drill to get that done. Um, so and just across the board, I think companies have done a little bit better with the let's say easier because it's not all easy, but the easier elements are the governance aspects and the some of the metrics reporting, and those tend to be done first in terms of creating new reports. The full-blown risk analysis, which involves at a company probably lots of different workshops, months of
Yeah.
planning, and especially if you're adding the climate scenario analysis piece on top of that and are
Mhm.
contracting with somebody to come in and do that, that's a lot of work and it's a lot of expense. And naturally, that's why it's the lowest reported element, across the board because, it's big and expensive to do. But I think the regulations, across the board, whether it's California or if you're a large company doing business in the EU, you've at least had to think about this and getting your house in order, to be in compliance if and when those rules come.
Yeah, I have to agree. We see also companies work with whether it's vendors or buyers, as you said, outside of the US, and there's actually quite a lot of these. And as we see customers are getting asked about their EcoVadis scoring or any
Yeah,
other
absolutely.
scoring, and some of them it's hitting them for the first time, and it's you can hear the stress on the other side. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah,
do
in particular,
yeah,
if you're part of a big European company supply chain, you're probably going to get pushed
yeah,
on this in some
yeah.
form. Yeah.
Um, One kind of a follow-up question to that. We've talked about what they need to do. Do you see companies seeing the opportunities around reporting, seeing it not just as a burden, but as whether the opportunity or saving costs or seeing the upside or the positive side of it?
Yeah, I think there are in terms of companies we've seen that have gone through these exercises, there are. It is, it's worth having these discussions, both on the risks and on the opportunities
Yeah,
front for new ideas to surface, or at least coming out of it feeling more confident that okay, we've done a deep dive into all these various risks, and we
right.
feel more comfortable coming out of that. But I know some companies that go through it and they identify actual opportunities for,
Well,
whether it's business opportunities, new cost savings, actually on the business side as well. So
that's
I
ongoing.
think,
Yeah,
I think it's worthwhile for every company to to undertake one of these exercises. Particularly if you're in a climate prone, um, a climate stress or extreme weather stress prone location, or operate in those locations, or if you're particularly vulnerable to climate transition risks,
right.
to at least have these discussions internally. And then you can tell your investors as well, like, look, we have done a deep dive into this, and that adds some comfort there. Because for all investors saying that we want data, and they do want data, and it's all about the data. Actually, a lot of it on the climate front is, you know, what tell me about your risk assessment process, or which risks have you
Yeah,
identified? How are you looking to mitigate and manage these risks? Um, that's what, at the end of the day, they really want to know, because it reduces potential for, financial negative financial impacts in their portfolios. And that's how the TCFD, got started back in the day.
yeah,
This is an issue that's being under considered, under reported on. We need a structure to do that, and that happened, and I think has been a benefit for companies and investors.
yeah. Thanks for laying that out. We do try, and we need to try harder, I think, on both kind of in our ecosystem, talk about the benefits and the upside and the business opportunities when you see energy consumption and you see even on the governance side and these opportunities coming up. So thanks, that was very helpful.
Yeah.
Um, talk about upside and so on, we can't go talk about sustainability without kind of touching innovation. So I would like to ask about how do you see innovation and specifically generative AI changing the ESG space and sustainability?
Yeah, I think it has huge potential ramifications that you're already seeing. Obviously not just for sustainability aspects, but across businesses in general, with every business out there looking to see how they can use AI in some way to create efficiencies. And that's also true in the sustainability space. But I think there's massive opportunities here for the data collection side, the data analysis side, finding, you know, new findings within all the data that you're reporting, creating the reports themselves, ESG reports, even though it's not perfect, and nor will it be perfect, and it's going to involve humans in the loop, like every AI program does. Being able to create customized reporting very easily for various stakeholders. Um, Probably going to make things easier on the auditing and insurance side as well. So yeah, I think there's big potential benefits that are coming from AI, um, and also just helping to get all this data out of spreadsheets that companies have been keeping forever and into databases where it can be manipulated and used in various ways. And I'm sure I'm missing lots of other potential angles on the AI front. But yeah, it's definitely there already, and more is coming. And AI improves, at least to date, exponentially, with every new iteration, at least of the bigger AI programs. And then on the ESG risk side, obviously
Yeah,
responsible AI use and ethical AI is becoming a factor for investors as well, in terms of how companies are using the data, what data they're using. Is it inadvertently causing things like discrimination, hiring practices, and promotion? And
absolutely.
so it's all over, and it's going to be with us for a long time.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think once we can grab and this puzzle, what we do is if we can take away some or a lot of the pain of the data collection, and as you said, it kind of get a bit away from the spreadsheets, there'll be more time for all these very talented people in ESG to focus on the strategy and talk to organizations
Yeah.
more about the narrative and the future and where the trend is going and you know what, actually understand the climate risk even better.
Yeah.
Uh, take the eyes of the next column in Excel. I think that's high on my list for that. So yeah, AI is definitely there. And if the more talented people we have in the field could be more focused on strategy and understanding organizations better and not just collecting the data, I think that's huge. And I think the other aspects which we need to give attention to is discrimination and to how data is perceived and what kind of outcomes we get from AI. I think that's very important. And that's special for the next generation and the next generation coming into the workforce, which will be impacted by tools and
Yeah.
entities working with them. Um,
Absolutely. I mean, the younger generations are now, coming out of colleges, universities,
yeah.
fully equipped with these tools as well. They're using them in the classroom. So they're going to, be used to working with these as assistants. And like with any assistant, hopefully focusing the assistant on the more mundane tasks while you do the value
Yeah,
added and hopefully more fun stuff,
yeah,
rather than
absolutely.
chasing data around and
Yeah,
um, you know um,
go ahead.
wondering whether you should use this or that word in your report and how to describe something. And
Yeah,
there'll always be some of that. And then
no,
the
for sure.
lawyers now will add even more of the wordsmithing to that, and you know, maybe there's AI lawyers that will come along in the future as well that will make that process easier. But
Yeah,
yeah, certainly
yeah,
interesting times.
yeah. Absolutely. You actually touched what kind of my last way, getting very close to the end. So before we wrap up, there's always a kind of a bonus questions I ask all my guests, and it actually helps me be more optimistic always after this question. So I'm not saying it has to be optimistic, but I'm not laying any ground rules here. But I do like to ask, what motivations and drivers do you see evolving in the near future for sustainability?
Yeah, I thought a little bit about this one, and I'm not sure there's one overarching driver for this,
Okay.
but I see
Yeah.
sort of a few legs to the stool that keep ESG going through this. I think about this as kind of a correction. You have market corrections where you have sell-offs, and this
Mhm.
one would probably be a deeper sell-off in the ESG context. But after every sell-off, there's corrections that are made, and
Mhm.
usually come out of it in a better place. But in terms of like the legs of the stool, the firm ones are companies seeing business improvements in the sustainability area that actually can be additive to the business in various ways in terms
Right.
of
Yeah.
energy use and water use and cost savings, new products, better ways to ship products. And I think that's definitely here to stay, and that's also being driven by the customer and supply chains as well. And I think the good thing about that aspect too is that you don't need complicated acronyms to describe those things to your board and senior management team. You can just say, okay, this is what we're doing on renewable energy. This is what we're doing on water use.
Right.
And it's more easily understood than once you get, into the alphabet soup, which, you know, um, a lot of, board members, at least in the US, still don't even know what ESG is, and not alone the various acronyms that are being tossed around. So I think that's one firm leg of the stool. I think the actual ESG leg of the stool, and I use actual meaning what ESG was sort of supposed to be,
Yeah.
which was investors' analysis of non-financial risks and
Mhm.
opportunities, particularly on climate and long-term orientation of businesses. I think that one definitely sticks around as well because there are actual, financially relevant risks across the space and not just in the climate area, for companies.
Yeah.
And investors will keep pushing on that front, as well. So that's a big one as well. Um, Regulation, although uneven, is a definite leg of the stool. There's lots of changes going on and being contemplated in Europe, on the omnibus bill
Yeah.
and whatever. But something will emerge from that. It's not they're not just going to throw away everything on that front. So that'll be a key driver. California will be a key driver in the U.S. And other states that might come along in the process. And then, sort of, I think the last one is the old school corporate social responsibility, that type of reporting, issuing ESG and sustainability reports, because
Yeah.
companies, they've been doing this for at least 40 years, probably longer.
Yeah.
They want to showcase the good things that they're doing, in terms of their responsibility, effort, and sustainability. And Because that's been going on for so long, that's here to stay as well. I don't think
Yeah.
there's any meaningful drop off in that aspect as well. So you take it all together, and there's still no better way to put it than this is ESG or this is sustainability. And
Yeah.
it becomes an area that's almost too big to fail, in terms of, if you look back to the kind of the banks and the financial crisis, and um, the some of the terminology that came out of that, like these things can't fail because they're too big to fail. So I think we're in that area where, yeah, there's going to be a lot of, blowbacks and corrections and whatever, but the various elements still survive in some form. And then I think finally, if we can get more clarity on this tariff situation, and we looks like maybe incrementally we might, then companies can go back to more worrying about their day-to-day business. And
Yeah.
sustainability is part of this day-to-day business because now there's just
Climate
so
risk
much
is not going
uncertainty.
away.
It's like
Yeah.
it's not going to be the main topic in the boardroom right now because there's so much business uncertainty. So if we can get some of that cleared away, then that could provide another impetus to start refocusing on sustainability. So I'm very optimistic. Obviously a lot of these changes are painful for, a lot of
Yeah.
companies and a lot of investors, but it's sort of a natural fallout in terms of the pendulum kind of swinging back from the huge run up that we had in ESG in 2018, 2019, 2020. It was sort of inevitable at some point that the pendulum, swings back a little bit.
Yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense, and I think yeah, there's a lot of things kind of troubling boards and managements, and obviously, it's I think climate risks are not going away, and I think innovation and more we'll see more on the renewable energy side, and I think that was one point that hasn't been mentioned before, but if we make this more into plain English and not just ABC soup, as you mentioned, that could be, I think that's very important actually, because it's not just for different stakeholders, but actually for the more even traditional ones, which means investors, which mean um, stockholders, which means employees, which means management members. And we see it also. Some are very familiar with it. Not everyone knows that they're stakeholders, and maybe we do need to go back and use English, even yeah. So I think
Right.
that's a very strong
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, I mean, there's broad concern among stakeholders. I think it's just how you speak to them. I mean, if you're speaking to employees, they don't know what ESG means. I mean, they just don't. You talk to them about your environmental
But
efforts or environmental responsibility and diversity and the things that they understand. Um, and I would say the same for boards and managements too. They understand, okay, they understand efficiencies and cost savings, and they understand renewable energy and things like that. They don't know what the EU omnibus is or what EFRAG is
yeah,
or just some of that I think it would serve this. I just call it sometimes the ESG community better if we can just get away from some of these acronyms, over acronyms, at
absolutely.
some point. That is my
Um,
great hope, among others.
I'm a partner for you with that one for sure. I share the same feelings about it. Chris, thank you so much. Well, it was great to have you with us, and an eye opener and interesting, and I learned a few new stuff, and was great to hear your opinion. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
I think, it's cliche and we've already discussed some of this, but I think ESG is here to stay. You read about that all the time, but I think that's
Yeah,
very much true. Might look a little different in the future, but
yeah.
absolutely not going away anytime soon. So stay tuned for what's next.
Amazing.
Right.
I love that. Again, thanks you so much. I'll just say to the audience, thanks. And if anyone has any further questions for Chris, feel free to contact him on LinkedIn. I hope that's okay for me saying that,
Yeah,
Chris.
absolutely.
And or reach out through the Leaders Arena website. Yeah, further than that, thanks everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions for me or for 7E, feel free to send us an email at hello@the7e.com or reach out to us on LinkedIn. For more Inside ESG, subscribe to our channels, the 7E channels on YouTube or Spotify. And we'll see you next time. Chris, again, this was great. Thank you so much for joining today.
Oh, thanks again, and it's a pleasure being on, and good luck to you and 7E.
Thank you so much.
All right.
We'll see you all next time. Thank you. Bye
All
bye.
right. Thank you. Bye.